Last week, Cipsoft released a directed survey. These are usually targeted to less people than the ones in the website, and I happen to be surveyed by it. And in my opinion, this is possibly the best news we could be getting from them. The survey is about hunting grounds, but instead of the usual of nerfing monsters, this one has a huge list of spawns, mostly outdated ones that are quite forgotten about or never used, and they are looking for feedback to improve them. The feedback includes the loot, experience, difficulty, accessibility, map layout, and monster density. The last two in particular is something I'm greatly excited for, because honestly, I thought they had forgotten about this being an option. Lately, all the nerfs or balancing changes they have done have been through experience or loot, without taking into consideration any of the other options, and both map design and density of monsters are quite a big factor of what makes a spawn good or not, and in a lot of cases, changing this alone will be a major change to the spawns. Like the best example is Isabi. At the release, the amount of creatures was very minimal, and their loot was terrible. The moment they added a lot more creatures by increasing the density, it became better instantly, and then adding more loot and experience on top of that made it the top spawn for the longest time. And throughout the years they had done some nerfs but only to experience or loot, which in reality what makes the spawn so good is the density. The amount of creatures you can lure is what makes it so easy to scale from the low levels hunting there, all the way to the high levels being able to do it as well. So this is something that I have wanted for quite some time. The world of Tibia is so huge and at the same time is so limited by the meta spawns. And don't get me wrong, buffing or nerfing spawns is not gonna stop that from being the case. However, a lot of times, especially in crowded servers, if you can't get the best spawn at the time that works for you or your team, and the second best is taken, and the third one is far worse than the other two, then you start to think it's not worth the time to play the game. And it is quite clear that is the case at the moment. A lot of spawns could get some changes that will instantly make them more appealing as alternative spawns or even some new top places. I did my part by filling in the survey, but unfortunately only 5 spawns can be chosen, and I wanted to add even more, so I'm making this video with the hopes of possibly reaching Cipsoft to a degree, but more importantly bringing attention to this topic, so that perhaps more people join in the survey if you can, and share your thoughts. So with that, let's start. The Sunken Temple is mostly a solo spawn, however the difficulty of the creatures makes it hard for the level range that it should be for, and the map design also doesn't allow proper laps to be done. In every direction you take, you will be forced to backtrack the way you came from. The fire section of library is in a bit of a weird spot. The spawn is still decent, but at the same time the difficulty is too high, so you struggle to hunt on this spawn for less experience than the other alternatives in the level range. Also, with the accessibility of library being limited, you are forced to drag in your supplies in order to do your fall hunts, which is an outdated thing to do. In every other spawns you can easily leave and refill. It also runs into overkilling, which is something that limits high levels from coming to this place as well. Once you start reaching that point, then the experience just goes down unless you get creative with extra pulls, which are hard to do since the map layout has a clear path to follow. The Warzones 1 through 3 are just annoying. What I mean by this is that creatures have too many abilities that make the hunt unpleasant, like going invincible, making summons, getting you drunk, mana drain, and high damage output with a high HP on top of it. So they are hard to kill and hard to sustain. This is usually not a problem for the quest itself, since people do Warzones in big groups, but also the map layout is a clear point A to B with no viable paths to make it a loop. The Salt Caves of Bashmurs, I have no comments, I haven't been there at all. The Ixupan Sanctuary is one they recently tried to make more viable. I tried it out during a rapid spawn and the results were bad even with that. As a duo level 600s, we couldn't get past 40k and loot was less than 500k per person the hour. It's safe to say it would be worse without rapid. The biggest problem with this area is the layout. Lots of rooms with 2 square entrances. That makes it harder to lure monsters out to make pulls. The idea of adding a teleport to restart the loop was okay, but still far from enough. Gloom Pillars or any Rotten Blood content, I have no comments, no experience hunting them. The Ancient Ancestral Grounds, aka Deathlings, this I actually have no problems with. It gives good experience and a bit of loot, but the biggest problem with it is the retargeting of Deathlings to Deathlings. The lore is supposed to be that they are in war with each other or something like that, but it makes this spawn so much worse whenever you lose monsters because they decide to go attack another monsters away from you. Very unnecessary thing that will make the spawn more popular and better if it didn't exist. Mirror Nightmare, aka Dark Tides from Soul War, its biggest flaw compared to the other Soul War spawns is the apparitions. There is the base creature named Mirror Image that when attacked turns into a vocation apparition, with a priority on the person that attacked it. This is a problem because it has 3 creatures more than the other Soul War spawns. That is a problem when trying to use praise at the spawn. Both offensively or defensively become worse since the damage is spread through more monsters. Both layout and density give the spawn quite a bit of potential, but with the current experience rate of soulward creatures, it doesn't justify the difficulty for lower levels to hunt. At the moment, it's greatly better for higher levels with Taints than the level 700 range. Warzone 4 doesn't have a fast enough respawn to include a team. The chasm spawns do too much mana drain and damage for solo hunts to enjoy, and as a duo or trio it's terrible. I tried it at the level range that it should be hunted at, and we couldn't make past 1.8kk raw, which is roughly 50% less than the alternatives. And the reason we tried was because of double loot event, and even with that it wasn't good. Both experience and loot need to be increased, but also worth mentioning, the spawn is limited behind an entry fee to enter for 8 hours of 10 suspicious devices or task points, which is unique to these Warzone spawns. Warzone 5 is also quite low in experience, loot is okay, which is why it's still somewhat hunted by solo players, but that's about it. Pumping Seal is a spawn I hunted a lot 5 years ago, when all of the creatures in the Ferumbra session still gave good experience and loot. It was a viable alternative to Team Hunt Play Seal, which was far more contested, but ever since the changes on XP and loot on the creatures, it's hard to justify ever going there, especially with Play Seal still being superior, but now that it's not hunted by anyone, if you want to hunt for Greenleash Wings, you will just end up going there. And the main problem with any of the spawns in the questline is that they are all hard to get to, giving them a 1 in accessibility while being still quite difficult to hunt for little to no rewards in XP. Fairies Meadows, which is the surface, I think is fine as it is. Nightmare Isles I also think is fine as it is. Perhaps a slight experience increase of 5% to 10% will make it more popular. Its current problem is the map layout is confusing for most people, and the creatures are harder than the alternatives of the level range. Carnivorous as a profit spawn I think is okay. The issue is that the experience is a little bit too low to even hunt there for profit. Kilmaresh Catacombs, if referring to the Sphinx and Creep Warden area, is fine as it is. Deeper Ingle is too big on density for the third floor compared to the others, making this one far better and no reason to try the others, which already have an inferior map design that makes big lures hard to do. Murky Caverns is the word crocodiles. I tried both during a full moon and without it. Both were bad. In terms of layout and density is okay. The problem is that they just don't give good enough experience or loot. Level 500's duo making 3kk raw experience is not gonna make anyone go there. And it's not even a profit spawn either. Lastly, the full moon mechanic, although an interesting concept, for something that only happens 3 days a month, only giving about 10% increase of an already bad experience makes no sense. Elite Skeletons, another spawn I hunted a lot, that currently is nothing but a quest area. The creatures got nerfed heavily in experience. Loot is still decent, but the difficulty of the creatures is too high, and the experience is too low. There is no incentive for teams to try it, because you are far better off anywhere else. The spawn also has always been small, so team hunts are hard to pull off without overkilling. Lower Spike, although great in concept, was heavily misplaced. The density and size of the spawn is massive, but the creatures just don't give enough experience to incentivize a team hunt, and even solo hunts are bad because it takes too long to clear monsters. Falcon Bastion, I don't think the castle itself is meant to be a hunting place, but the basement could use a bit of respawning time increase, as well as some XP buffs to make it viable again. Medusa Tower is viable as a solo, but it's easy to overkill. A tiny bit of faster respawn will fix this, or additional floors added to it. Wildlife Rave itself is great. The problem is that it's part of a weird concept of alternating raids, so it's not consistent enough and the respawn of it only makes it viable on the last 15 minutes of the raid. Ixupan's last stand, we tried to make it work while farming the quest item, and honestly it just needs a experience buff that will make lower levels try it out, because for us at the time it just was nowhere near our options for the level range. Netherworlds, aka Flinces of Porthope, I think a rework of the second floor, making it perhaps similar to the first floor density of creatures, but with far more freakish low souls, will make it a viable and hard spawn to pull off, but maybe worth the risk. The Minotaur raid of Oramon, same as the wildlife, is just too random, but this one has a mechanic that makes it harder to kill creatures and is honestly a hassle to deal with. Isabi Catacombs, creatures just do too much damage, and after the XP nerf, it makes no sense to hunt there. The map layout could be improved to make a better loop, but even as it is, it can be worked with. It just needs more XP. Okulnir, simple. Just increase the respawn of creatures by 5x, and it will be good. This place has easily the slowest respawn rate I have ever encountered. Even with a low level EK, I needed to go through the entire island by myself and monsters from the first pool will still not be back up, but 1 or 2 more creatures to the case will definitely also be a great addition. Jalahar Cemetery Quarter, funny enough, is still the same 6 years later. The Nightmares could use a bit of experience increase and the green case will instantly become viable if they were connected instead of separated graves. Fairies Underground is alright, creatures just do a bit too much damage. Barrel Drift, aka Deathlings of Edron, they're just not viable because of the reflect chain attack. Removing that will incentivize people to try them further. Drefia Greens needs more density and improvement of the layout to make it easier to connect pools or kite monsters. Forest of Life, this spawn had potential just by looking at the size of it and density of creatures, but they just give too little experience. As a duo of level 1 case, we couldn't get past 3kk raw, which is just sad. A massive increase of experience will instantly make it more viable for team hunts. Goroma, it doesn't specify which part of it, but all of it just needs faster respawn. Most all spawns suffer from a slower rate compared to anything recent. Claustrophobic Inferno, the mechanics of the trials is what makes the spawn both good and bad. Being forced to stay in a particular floor for a set amount of time in order to be able to enter the trials is a big problem. But at the same time, if the trials were accessible more often, then it will also make the spawn too good. Perhaps reducing the monster density of the trials will make it less rewarding for very high levels. But the biggest issue is the mechanic of Infernal Demons. They go for the lowest HP player, often being the druid. This adds an unnecessary hassle and difficulty to the spawn, especially when the mechanic itself doesn't work properly. Blocking the path of the demons doesn't make them retarget you. They just stand there until you move, and even when the druid can't be attacked, in the case of being behind 3 walls for example, they still won't target the EK or anyone else. And even when rest, the moment a person passes by then instantly resets their aggro, making this spawn a pain to hunt for everyone. Temple of the Moon Goddess is fine as it is. A tiny bit of loot or faster respawn will be well received. Brain Grounds is fine as it is, but the 3rd floor could use a rework as it is ignored by everyone. The freakish low souls hit too hard and the layout of the floor is far from being good. Earth section of library is insane to think about. The fact that it never got reworked till now, and even more that it was included in the nerf of the library in general. The spawn is just non-existent. In terms of size, it's a fraction of the others. The density of creatures is also just minimum, and it doesn't have a Earth Squid version, so the replacements to it are Inkplops, which are the hardest hitting creature in the entire library. So this spawn is hard to hunt for absolutely no reward. Either a full rework is in order, or a massive increase of experience for the books is needed. That on top of an increase of density. I think it will be an interesting concept if this section in particular was focused towards more loot, since both Inkplops and Biting Books drop a good amount of cheap items. But for starters, the ice creatures on this side should also be replaced. Undead Seal map layout and density is inferior to the other spawns of the questline, but the creatures in here are also the hardest hitting with a majority of Hellfire and Undead Dragons, making it too hard to hunt, but for the least reward possible. Phantasmal Seal is just not meant to be hunted as it is, and the maze area should also not be reverted to how it was, because it made no sense the monsters did no magical damage on the walls. Bognak, similar to Deathlings, their gimmick of attacking neutral creatures is what makes the spawn bad. Remove that, fix the density of creatures, and it will become more viable. Rattleton Ancient Sewers just need a rework of the map layout, but also Glut Golems need their experience nerf reverted. Creep Warriors I haven't tried, but they are straight up copies of an already nerfed Skeleton Elite Warrior, so start from there. Dwelling of the Forgotten, the creatures hit way too hard. I dare to say that I struggle here nearly as much as the Secret Library spawns. So while being a profit spawn, the risk is a bit too high for most people to try it out, and also the layout doesn't fit teams, only duos, and even then it can be overkill. Plague Seal layout and density remains the best out of the Ferumbras spawns, but after the XP nerfs, it just doesn't compare to anything of the low range. The spawn is much harder to hunt than alternatives, yet it's not nearly as rewarding. The only salvation to it at the moment is the massive demand for the Grimlich Wings. Goannas is hard to say what they even refer to, but the main issue with Isabi is the density of creatures is too high, making it possible to push for big lures, and that allows even high levels to make high XP for less risk. Grounds of Fire, the layout is not meant for proper team hunting, and the nerfs of creatures doesn't make sense to try it either. Demon Forge, they are referring to the entirety of Inquisition, which in concept with the density of some areas should be viable, but the respawn speed is too low to make any area by itself enough. Ixupans, I have yet to try it in detail, but the biggest problem is the spawn is too large and filled with 2 square holes, making it hard to make good pulls. The potential is there with the current version of the creatures, but the layout is not made to work. DT Seal with Besklos and Hellflyers being the receivers of the highest nerf makes this not viable. Sarganash could potentially be reworked to be a version of Flinces where you can team or solo hunt with pools of 8x8s, but the density doesn't support that, and the map has too many narrow passages. That stops it from connecting lures. Yalahar's Sunken Water needs a faster respawn and a few more creatures. Bull Tower Lair, too high density and high damage output of creatures, but it's okay in my opinion. Having tried both duos and team hunts, I don't think it's nearly as broken. Misguided Hideout, creatures just give no loot and density is minimal. Secret Grounds is too big with almost no density of creatures to fit that space, and the dynamic of Renegade Quarters and Secret Serpents is too much effort for nothing but bestiary. Ingold Surface is fine as it is, perhaps even too much damage output from creatures. Great Pearl Fan Reef, I haven't tried enough, I think the creatures hit too hard for the low range. Juggernaut Seal, same as DT Seal, it has mostly the creatures that have been nerfed the most, and the damage output is one of the highest from the Ferombus spawns. Oskayadu Undercity probably means the word tigers, so I'll go with that, but it's the same as the word crocodiles. The experience and loot are too low for the options in the level range. The density and layout of the spawn is not bad, even though monsters hit a bit too hard for their level. Ruins of Nur, fine as it is if the focus remains for profit. Halls of Ascension, bad map layout for hunting. True Asuras, fine as it is if the focus is profit. Personally, I believe the damage of the True Asuras remains too high if you compare it with the other creatures that do less and give far more XP, but at the exchange of giving better profit is fine as it is. The extension of the museum, with improved density and respawn rate, will become much better instantly. Monster Graveyard is been nerfed since I last hunted here, but I think the size of the spawn makes it easier for high levels to pull bigger numbers, and having to nerf it for them makes it terrible for the lower levels that want to try it. Unthrone of the Fallen is the only spawn that has potential for team hunt, given the size and density, but the experience of the creatures is too low to make sense for a team. Profit-wise, it's in a great spot for duo hunts. Upper Rushable, I assume it means the entire area past the wall, which could become more viable with a vast increase of density of monsters, making it perhaps the next level of the Nightmare Isles. And with that, I have gone through most of the spawns in the list. I think some of them just need simple fixes that will make them instantly viable, and others do need a lot more thought into them, and possibly reworks. I do hope we get some changes, and this doesn't end up just being a bait. Thank you for giving me your time in this video. Feel free to share any of your insights of this response. If anyone knows how you can access this poll directly so that you can partake in it, then share that as well, because I have no idea where to find it. It just appeared in my client one day and that was it. Thank you for watching, and a special thanks to Tuna Hero, Nightstar and Thor the Slasher.